And welcome back to V-Road TCG's weekly Vanguard podcast. I'm Cole.
And I'm Trey.
And we probably should bounce back from a pretty hectic back and forth kind of episode that was our last one. And we kind of want to try out something a bit kind of off the dome, sort of, in a way, but it is a lot more structured. It's kind of something where we look at a really classic Vanguard boss, and we kind of look at it over the years from its inception to how it's been interpreted in Standard, which is kind of what I want to focus on more. Like, we'll definitely go through everything as far as like the major boss units of that character, I guess, goes. But I think a lot of encounter decks have interpreted their boss units in a really creative way that I want to kind of put a lens on, because I think it is unique how this game decides to take its older stuff and give it sometimes like new identities in ways that like other card games might not.
Yeah, it does a very good job of seeing the progression through everything. You can kind of see how Vanguard progressed as a game in general, whereas like on some of these earlier skills we're going to be talking about here, like they're super like, oh, you really only get to use the skill once, maybe twice a game. And then you can see like, okay, well, we've actually reduced the cost for the next iteration of the game and made it so you're still doing the same thing, but it's slightly stronger. You can use it more than once type thing. And then like progression of keeping it similar, but slight changes to improve upon the skill in its own right.
Yeah, so this one, good guinea pig as always, because he was, he's been around for a while, so it's worth always going back to a classic, which is one of probably the deck that I relate to Trey the most among others, which is Overlord. So going to like the very first one, I don't know if you've actually read this guy, like the original Overlord.
Mm-hmm.
He's a pretty old dude, but at least as far as like the original incarnation of him, he had like the remnants of what they kind of wanted a boss unit to be at the beginning of the game, where there were clans, but there was no like, oh, you can only run stuff of one clan or versus the other. They just had a lot of things like that the original Dio has, where if you don't have a Kagero card on your board, then he gets like minus 2k, so he's a 9k grade 3 or something like that. And then he'll have like the first incarnation of a restanding Vanguard, which was like Counterblast 3, to give him a red text that if he hits, he stands himself and he loses Twin Drive. Like, that's so wild to read nowadays.
Yeah, like this is what I was kind of saying. That like they really made bosses like, oh hey, this is the skill. If you get to this card, this is what your kind of game winner is, in a sense. Like, you still do all your other effects and stuff, but like, hey, this one skill. And you can kind of see from the progression of the cards, especially of Overlord here, like they've made things with that skill. Because like, yes, right now, this one is a must hit. Doesn't matter if it's Vanguard or Rear Guard, you're swinging like from, you can use this skill, which is one thing that they actually kind of get rid of later down the line. But you obviously don't do drive checks as a Rear Guard, so it doesn't really change anything. So you're really doing it as your Vanguard. But the fact that it has to hit a Rear Guard, like, oh, your opponent guards it, okay, you just wasted your drive checks and you're not restanding, and you're Counterblast 3.
Yep. Counterblast 3 is a crazy cost to read these days.
Yeah. Very seldom do we see that anymore. And if I feel like we get back to that point in current Standard version of the game, then they're making some crazy
some wacky,
divine skill. Yeah. Like divine skill, Counterblast 3. That's a game winner right there.
Yep. But yeah, it's funny too, because reading the like Counterblast 3 to get 5k as well. Obviously that's like chump change nowadays, and it's like such a meme that things get 5k in Standard. But back when like your best shield was, I believe it was 10ks from trigger units, and then I think like maybe grade 1s had 10k shield. I don't know if they got that at the very beginning, or if they got that a bit later in like V, but shield was super low and you didn't really plus a ton, so 5k was like probably a big deal.
Even the -2k if you didn't have a Kagura Vanguard or
That's
Vanguard,
also a
like
big deal.
that was a big deal because that completely changed guarding numbers, especially with a booster. So yeah, I mean, yeah, very meme kind of laughable like skill, but from the start of the game, from where it was huge. It was really like kind of crazy for what it did.
Yep. And then of course, I think quickly shortly after, we get into one of the 3 trifectas of like what a true Vanguard meta was. And I wasn't sure if it was this card or the other card first, because if I'm being honest, my history with like really early Vanguard is not great because I started in like late G. But of course, like when it comes to like super early Vanguard, the next Overlord that pops into my brain is the End. Because we didn't have, he doesn't have a limit break. I know he doesn't have that this early in. So I know that he's still really early. But he was like the first instance of, along with like MLB sort of, he was kind of his own deck. But this was just like you got to slap it on the original Overlord because then he'll be 13. And then he's got a much more lax like restand cost that's like also not a once per turn, so that's kind of the first instance of being like, oh, you could, if you had 4 counterblast, you could counterblast 4 and discard 2 other copies of Overlord the End from your hand and get 3 Vanguard attacks in 1 turn, and that probably killed back then just by itself.
Yeah, I mean, power wise, again, kind of crazy. You know, the condition of having to have a soul card was one of my first, I think, interactions with any type of soul play in Kagero. Really. So that was kind of a fun one, as well as, yeah, like you said, if you can counterblast a bunch, you can just go to town. But typically, I mean, you know, you can't spend 6 counterblast in turn. So, but 3 attacks was crazy. The fact that it wasn't a once per turn probably was one of the reasons why they implemented it once per turn, and I can't say that for facts. That's just in my heart. I feel that my guy was the reason that did it. So I can't be mad at it because it was fun. And honestly, that original Overlord the End art is still my favorite. Nothing's going to change about it.
It's pretty good.
Like just all of it. That's really what encapsulated everything for me with Dragonic Overlord. Just my goat.
And I guess maybe this is probably the first time, because his restand ability is Vanguard Circle only, so I wonder if this is where they kind of pivoted the deck to being super Vanguard centric.
The End, yeah, because it like was the one that had to be on top of the other. Like it was like, this is your Vanguard, you want to end on it. Like, but it was I kind of came in late LB4, late Legion and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, getting this card when it came out, I can't say for certain, but it felt like it was one of those early ones that like really
started the trend of
started that trend of like having the 2-stage Vanguard. Like you have your first stage and then you go into the end, kind of evolution of Vanguard.
Yep. And then I think after this we got into like the break ride stuff, and that's when like Limit Break 4 kind of started, and you got kind of like the first glimpse of what a late game in Vanguard kind of looked like in like a really structured sense, because you couldn't do it until you had 4 more damage, and then you had to have something ride over this one so it could get like 10k, which was huge. And the red tech skill that was probably the easiest incarnation of like Overlord standing, like restanding itself up until now, because it was just a counterblast and you discard a Kagero from your hand after it hits after an attack to rear guard, because at that point you didn't actually even need a hit either. But it was the first instance of it being like a once per turn. So
yeah, it's kind of a nice one, because this one paired really well with the End. because you could attack 3 times with your Vanguard because you could counterblast 5. I mean, you're counterblasting 1 for this once per turn skill, then you're using its own skill twice. So if you had the ability to counterblast 5, you could, and which just made it really good. Got a bunch of power, it really created okay, we're trying to add that win condition late game. Like, we've been kind of dragging it out. We're gonna try to really end the game now that we're at 4 damage. So
yeah, I do think I remember something like that about like this Overlord, this Break Ride one, Overlord the End being put on top of it, so it's like a 23k, and it's got a pretty lax first attack into like a pretty meaty couple of other attacks, and I think it was kind of the first kind of instance of like what current Overlord kind of ended up being, but we might be getting a little ahead of ourselves. But I think after that was, I don't think there was anything in between this one and the Rebirth.
don't think so, no.
Don't think so? Yeah.
That was the Cross, but I don't know if that was...
The Cross was a
after.
Legion, so we'd be after, yeah.
Yeah.
But I've never read this card in my entire life. I've just always known that the art of like any version of a Dragonic Overlord of the Rebirth is really cool. Like, I love the ring in the background. He like doesn't quite look very Link Joker-y, and he looks pretty Overlord the End-y, but he's always had a lot of text though.
Yeah, one of the first full books, I feel like, in Vanguard, to say the least. But yeah, it became an interesting one because, well, he still kind of did a lot of the same things. It just changed up kind of the order of how it worked, and it made you obviously, use your rear guards in a different manner than what, well, Kagero's ever really done. So it really created an interesting one, and it gave you benefits for doing it. Like the old LB4 Dragonic Overlord, it just kind of gave the 10k if you did the effect if it was brought upon by another unit. Where this one, it's like, oh, if you've locked the 5 units or more, like then it kind of does the effects and you get the red tech skill. So it really made you consider going into it as like, okay, I'm gonna go into this, but my Vanguard's the only thing I'm doing this turn type thing. Which was a good and a bad thing. So made it an interesting one because, well, yeah, that's all you got.
Yeah, I don't know. I wish, the only thing I wish I played during its heyday was like the Link Joker Limit Break format, because it feels so... I read this card and I read the Break Ride before it, and they both read the exact same to me in a way. Like, this one can get its restand right after it attacks a Vanguard, and it's for like a pretty chill cost, if I'm being honest. Like, if you know your rear guards aren't going to do much for you, and you know you're going to have like the Break Ride and he's going to be like a 23k and stuff, like, it's probably pretty worth it. But I read these two and I don't really see like anything like too different, if I'm being honest. But it was probably good. I just wish I could like say with confidence how good or bad like this style of Overlord was.
It was an interesting one because like the good thing about this one, because this was kind of like, other than the end, like this was like really the like first big iteration of just saying, hey, my Vanguard's just gonna attack you a bunch. It didn't lose its drives, it didn't do anything. Yeah, you had to discard 2 cards and you had to lock 5 cards and a counterblast, so it was kind of a heavy cost for it in hindsight. But it also just says, hey, I'm gonna really try to hit you and get you, get some triggers, get some draws, get some crits, really try to put some pressure on you.
Yeah, it must have worked, I imagine. I don't know if this was one of those scenarios where like Dragonic Overlord at the end with the Break Ride was just good enough that they never really touched this that much, or it was like a different build, and like, yeah, obviously it probably needs a lot more context, with maybe there were some Kagero rear guards that lock other things to make that ability not as taxing on you, because you do have to like counter... Wait, never mind. I'm reading this card. My third eye is opening. I'm seeing Counterblast 1 and choose one or more of your Kagura rearguards and lock it. Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking like, oh, you need to Counterblast 5 and lock 5. Okay, never mind. This card's actually pretty good. Okay.
To my knowledge, I only owned one copy of this card.
Oh, really?
And ran it in a deck. So if I got to it and wanted to use the skill, I could.
Sure.
But I never really liked it because it, like, as much as, you know, attacking twice with a Vanguard is good, it felt tough to say I'm sacrificing a lot to get this effect off, which, especially when you had the other LB4 and the end, it felt just like, okay, if I want to go for a kill turn, I'll attack 3 times with my Vanguard and still have 2 rearguard attacks versus just 2 Vanguard. I don't know. So that's just my personal opinion on it. I had it. It was like a cool card. It's a great looking card. Played with that whole Link Joker aspect, which was great.
It definitely has the cool factor, I think, for sure. Yeah. Like, the art is really cool, and I think I love the idea of having a board of 5 locked rear guards, and just you and your Vanguard against the world. Like, that sounds really, really cool. But I can only speak so much about how effective it probably was. But I do know that the card after this one was insane. In, like, the most tamest sense I can say it, which was obviously the cross, like the Legion. I don't know if we're skipping the Great here. I don't know if he's really worth mentioning because I know this guy was played like well into like mid G era. I don't know if there's like a Dragonic Overlord the Great stand. I'm just glossing over here. Let me know why that card was cool, but I know this one is cool, and there's a bit more to say, I think.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Legion was a super fun era. Having 2 effective units on your Vanguard at the same time, like, was really, like, kind of hard to wrap your brain around at first, but then you, like, realize, okay, it's just a pair. You get that 2,000 power as your base, like, you're fun. You can enact multiple effects based on what they are. And this one really created, like, this one, I think, in my opinion, really kind of set Kagura in its path of, like, being Kagura. What I mean by that is, like, Kagura kind of always had support cards that kind of dealt with your board, like Berserk Dragon. You'd play it, Counterblast, retire a unit, or, you know, a bunch of other miscellaneous cards that kind of focus on retire. But this is one that was like, you know, obviously you're attacking a rear guard, so you're retiring it. But this one like has that great condition of if it didn't hit, then all right, you pay the cost, retire 2 units. So it's kind of a fun one. Created some interesting scenarios, but can't go wrong with the X.
Yeah, I don't know. I can kind of easily see just kind of skimming what it does, how potent this would be. If you go like the break ride, the Dragonic Overlord, and then you ride this when you're at 4 damage. So this will be 21, and then you Legion it with the end. So you have that. And then when you Legion it, you get a copy of the end from your deck to your hand. So you have the cost to pay for his restand scale, because he'll have that being your Legion meat, because he's on the Vanguard circle. So then you'll swing with like this 40-something monstrosity that you know will get its restand because you tutored for the cost, and that just sounds crazy for what I know of like early Vanguard. Like, I'm sure there was like a bunch of crazy stuff going on, but I just know the shield was like not there, and card draw was just not there in the same way it is now. So that I know was like the first time I could see that Overlord was doing like some crazy stuff of manipulating like how it does its extra attacks, and like taking advantage of whatever the current mechanic of the era was.
Yeah, it is still really good, and I wish, and I hope, and I pray that they bring Legion into Standard.
No,
it's not gonna happen.
No,
but it would be fun. Think about a divine
if that's a
Legion.
gimmick. Yeah, if that's a gimmick for like a deck, that would sound really fun. I think that would be
that's
cool.
all I'm asking for.
Okay.
Like,
okay,
something like that. That would just be so fun. And I don't know. Like in my brain, I don't know why, but like Sacrifice Glass is the only one that kind of like gives me that Legion vibes because you're
Sure.
going from two like completely different units. But I don't know. But having two units on there, I know you can kind of get 3 units in a sense with like fucking Bob Zagra, where you have the
Sure.
2
Yeah.
arms and whatever. But
Not quite the same.
give me that pair card. Give me the two
Like
the two
panoramic
buddies.
art and stuff. That does. I love that stuff too. Don't worry. I think that's like the coolest part about Legion was the panoramic art with a lot of those.
So Bushy, if you're watching.
So I think next up was the Legends. I think from G.
They all kind of
Blur
mixed together in that area, but
well,
yes.
we'll hit both. But I know the Legends. So funny enough, when I first got into Vanguard, I noticed that the locals I bought a lot of my product from, they had this like Legend deck, which was basically like a souped up trial deck for G, and they made them on the original 3 like big fellas, being like PBO, Overlord, and like Blaster Blade and stuff. So I picked up this. Maybe I could have gotten the other ones. I don't know if they had them, but this was the first one I saw. So I picked it up because I wanted more decks to like try to learn the game with. And what I figured out pretty quickly was that, you know, while Stride was the thing you did, he went out of his way to, while he had a AG zone, he immediately stuck out to me as being something that was like pretending to be a grade 4. He'd give himself a drive check, he'd give himself 15k in grade +1, and he'd still be able to restand and stuff. But I thought that was really creative how like I mentioned with the cross, they kind of took the current mechanic and he just did his own thing with it.
Yeah, this is the Legend deck you're talking about for Toshiki Kai was really what really dragged me into Vanguard, because like I said, we started in that Legion LB4 kind of era late in it, but this deck was really what drug me into it, and then obviously I built out the other decks and all, but yeah, this deck, it didn't feel punishing to not Stride with this deck, because yeah, like you said, it's kind of a pseudo grade 4 in its own sense. Did what it wanted, but you obviously had to get your first Stride off, which luckily in this deck it had a Turner card, so you would Stride into your first one and it would turn up a card, so you were GB2 pretty much your second grade 3 turn if you were striding on your first one. So it didn't feel bad to not have another grade 3 to discard to Stride with, or you know, have the ability to. So it felt really good. It was really consistent, it felt like, so you can't really complain about him. He's just also like the blue background, it was very different for the most part.
Yeah.
Like Rebirth kind of had some bluish purple in the background, but the Legend really just like stood out with that blue in it. So nice.
Yeah, it was definitely, I think I'll never forget how like cool it is that he kind of makes himself become a grade 4. Like that is so unique, and they never went back to that. And I think it could have only have worked with Overlord, because he always wanted to do his own thing with whatever the current mechanic was, and especially because like he kept his own restand, but you had to like discard 3 cards. So the 3 cards you would drive check, you would just get them back, because he didn't lose any drive checks when he stood either. Which is something I've kind of noticed actually too, is that at least for a majority of these Overlords, he never loses drive checks, which is really cool.
Yeah, and on Overlord himself, just Dragonic Overlord, most of the time he does. But then you get to the alterations where the end, the Legend, the cross, well, the cross doesn't gain it, but the end, when it's attached to it, does. So it's kind of funny how like base level he does the mechanics slightly, and then the end or whatever the iteration that's in the deck with it is always like, hey, here's the progression of me, like I'm starting here, ending here, and always kind of progress that skill up.
Yeah, it's cool. And then I think it was set 13 where we finally got like a you know, a proper striding Overlord being the Destiny, and he did have like, you know, he was like everybody else. He had a when you ride him, or at the beginning of your ride phase, you can like do something, and then also when you stride over him, you can do something. So in his case, he's just like retiring something, and then looking at the top 7 to grab an Overlord, which I don't think we'll cover like the strides, because you know, that was just kind of adding on to what the Destiny and the Legend did. But I know the Ace was like a really cool card for what it was, and it needed to like discard Overlords for its stuff.
Yeah, and that kind of became a reoccurring mechanic with a lot of things, and even still to this day for strides and things, like even in standard, where you have to discard the same named card as your Vanguard, or have a specific text box of the name, you know, type thing. So yeah, it didn't feel like it did a whole lot. It did some searching, and it kind of felt like you were guaranteeing your stride for the next turn, as long as you didn't have to discard it for like a PG or something. So kind of, I always thought of it as just fighting stride fodder. When you run enough Overlords between the Legend and Destiny in the deck, you just have them, and it is what it is.
Yep. Well, I think that gives us a good picture of what Overlord started as, but I know it really got like a firm grip on its identity when we finally went to V. And I will say, I've always thought that its trial deck art went pretty hard, especially because it kind of tried to do something that the original art did, but kind of did something new, kind of like with what the Blaster Blade did in the first trial decks for V. But it was really simple. It was just Soul Blast 1, it gets 10k, and then if it hits, you Counter Blast 1 and discard 2, and you stand him and he gets Stride -1. That's it.
Yep.
That's all he needed to do, and at the time, it wasn't the worst.
This is where they kind of learned that it needs to not be a multiple time attack, like it's just a once per turn. Yep. They kind of went in this and finally said, okay, we need to do this. There's still a text box on that card that gets removed later on in editions that you'll see here in a bit, that they didn't fix yet, but it kind of made sense in the early era, as well as it kind of keeps that same aspect of cost. That counterblast, discard 2, or discard a card is something, or discard the grade 3 flame dragon. Like, there's a bunch of different iterations of the same thing that it wants to do. Stand the unit. This one, minus drive again. Overlord, minus drive.
Yeah, and I think the idea is they wanted this deck to run actually like a lot of draws for like most Overlords, I think, because when you have to discard so much to stand with like a less drive check or something, I think the idea is they want you to, over the course of the turn, have a net wash of cards from your drive checks, as if you would just did like a normal 2 drive Vanguard swing. So I think the idea of that kind of pushing it away from being like, okay, like you could run crits in this, and you probably will mostly run crits, but I like that they kind of incentivized you to like probably put in a lot of draws to recoup what you lose from having to discard that much. I could be wrong though. Maybe people just ran crits and just tried to kill super quick, but
yeah, it was, you know, kind of preference. I ran crits personally just because I said, well, if I attack your rear guard, pull crits, and then I attack your Vanguard, like, you know, you have to guard that, or I'm going to rip maybe 2 more crits at you and hit you for 4 in 1 turn. So you know, it obviously, when younger, you kind of just go burr with it. Nowadays it may be slightly different. Obviously, definitely things are different now, but yeah, at that time.
Well, you're definitely running draws in V, because those were PGs back then. Like,
correct.
You had to. It was
you ran the 4.
You ran 4. I could see like 6 and 6 or something, but that was also back when people were doing like crazy stuff with like 12 crits and.
You got away with a lot of stuff in V. So that's no surprise.
But after that, we got Dragonic Overlord the Great. I know he actually did come out before the end. Didn't save a picture of it, but I know he did something where he would call like a Dragonic Neo Flame, which is just like a grade 2. I think he like straight up kind of ripped it out of the deck or the drop zone. and then he did probably the first and maybe only instance of caring about a rear guard, where I think he would actually stand himself and your Neoflame and give them both like drive -1 as if that mattered for anybody but him. But I remember it was just like it felt like a boss unit that just kind of threw it just to give Overlord something at the time.
Well, and when this card came out, I thought it was kind of a weird one because it felt like they were trying to go to a Legion style deck, but
Sort of,
not, because it actually, you obviously needed to have the Neoflames, you know, on board. You wanted to have them, so it was like you had to run for this, and kind of forced you into it, which there was nothing wrong with that, but it just made sure you had to see that consistently. So it was kind of a fun one, and it, at least when it was placed, you had the consistency of getting it back, and obviously adding force markers and everything kind of made the deck pretty good. I never really played in this era too much of it, so I can't speak to how really well it played, but to me that's what it kind of felt like, is kind of like a false Legion.
Yeah, I think it was always the most bizarre to me in V, specifically because the set that Overlord the Great came out in, immediately the set after, we got the V version of Overlord the End. Like, they were sets apart, and it's kind of crazy to think about, because I remember that's when I started playing V a lot, because that's also when like Harmonix El Messiah came out and Link Joker started really being a thing that I could start playing a lot, because that was my favorite clan at the time. And I just remember seeing this card and no one's per turn on it, and it was two separate restanding skills that both gave it drive -1, but one of them gave it 10k for discarding 3 cards, and one of them was a Counter Blast 1 and a Soul Blast 1 to give it no power, but you had to have 4 or less cards in your hand. So it kind of started to like integrate like a hand size gimmick with the deck. I know there was a couple of rear guards that had that also cared about your hand size.
Yeah, and it was the most consistent 3 attacker Vanguard
Like,
out there, and like obviously on its last attack it's not getting any drive checks, but at the same time, at that point in time, you've either stacked triggers and things on it, or
stacked
you've buffed
force
your
markers.
Yeah,
like,
stacked force markers. You've put enough on it that makes it like PG or die type thing.
Oh yeah.
Or you have these crazy big rear guards and doing the same thing. So it felt funny. This was like the set 1, set 2 of V was that. Set 7 is when I came back because I bought a split of the Dragon Empire stuff. So it's kind of interesting to add this back into the deck, and then after I played this for a bit, I dropped back out of V, and it was like, okay, I'm done with it. But he was fun. Attacking 3 times the Vanguard always feels good, never feels bad, so I had no complaints about him.
Yeah, especially because this was the set that the gift 2s came out. So for force, it was making your Vanguard's original crit 2. So putting that on this guy was probably insane, especially if you do the discard 3 cards first to get him the 10k. So now he's like 23 with 2 crit and on his second swing, and he'll be the same number, if not maybe bigger, on his third swing. Like, it was clear, at least to me, it was like clear to see how Overlord by himself was winning games. Because I know, especially early in V, you had a Dragonic Waterfall that you went into after you were on Overlord, and he was cool because he was the first instance of like giving himself a crit, and he had like a set no restrict, and that was like a really cool way to show off like a win con. What's up?
Yeah, in the game.
Yeah.
It was an interesting one. It felt kind of wrong to go from an Overlord to a Waterfall because it wasn't the same. Like, it wasn't like Dragonic Overlord, the Waterfall or something. Like, that would have been so much better. Just in my heart, obviously, it didn't really matter. But I get why they kind of didn't do that, because 2 Overlords in the set would have been a lot, I feel like. But yeah, I mean, this card just had a bunch of options, and you could attack in any combination you really wanted, because you were discarding a bunch of cards, and you were kind of getting there with everything. So in this deck, I know I ran 12 crits, 4 heals. Like, I could say I pretty much No, I did that because I was like, I don't want to draw on drive checks because I don't need cards. I don't want to kill. You build your you play everything on your board. Swing the Vanguard.
Hell yeah! All right. Well,
you just go turbo.
Yeah. That tracks. But I know after this guy, they did kind of have a really long break with Overlord. They didn't really revisit him for a while until they started what I like to call the beginning of the end of V-Series. And funnily enough, he was the beginning of the end because in the first last wave of sets for V, we got the Cross with the V version. And this little idiot is still crazy in premium. I wouldn't say it's extremely crazy. It's a good deck in premium. It's a decent deck in V, but what it was it and the other deck that came out in the same set as it, being Alter Ego Messiah. These two decks would simply kill you on their turn 3. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This thing would put Overlord the End into its soul. It would get all of its abilities. It would treat its hand size as being 0, so there would be no question of if you could do both of its restands as soon as you wanted to. And its drive could not become 0 or less. So all the times something said drive -1, you would still get a drive check. And this deck, like Trey just mentioned earlier, incepted, I think, I'm not even kidding, 16 crit decks. They did not run heals, they just killed you.
Yeah, it was honestly a mistake for the game. It had some fun thought processes. Kind of poor execution, I think. This one, it felt like if Overlord ever had a menagerie of playing the different cards of Overlord, you ran it in this one, because all depending on whatever the situation was, you would do different things. But it just did way too much.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I saw the vision. I think we all saw the vision, but
it definitely tried.
It tried really, really hard. The problem is it tried too hard.
It was sweaty. It was sweaty.
Yes. This was the era of Vanguard where I actually didn't play at local tournaments too much. I believe it was when COVID hit. So there wasn't really a ton of events to go to, but there were events that happened, and there was a very clear direction the game went in that only got worse from here. But this was definitely the blueprint that all of those decks kind of followed, of oh yeah, we just don't have curse text on us. We don't have anything that cares about what our opponent is doing. We just have this crazy wombo combo that we can slam onto somebody, and it will kill them if we reach our win con.
Yeah, it did too much. First off, that's I mean that's the gist.
Second off, it did too much.
It did too much. But yeah, it just it needed some sort of restriction to it. But those continuous effects just say actually no. I'm gonna do what I want, so die.
Yep. Yeah, die. True.
That's the best I can say that.
This last version of Overlord in V isn't really a ton to talk about, if I'm being honest, because it was a part of a V clan a collection when Standard was either it was I believe it was the V clan collection either before Standard started or right before, or maybe in the middle of the beginning of it, but it was the V version of Rebirth, which was pretty cool. It did something really similar to I think the original one, but it did kind of incorporate a lot of things that made V like kind of cool but also kind of annoying was it could get a gift marker, it could still stand itself, it locked its own stuff still, I believe. Yeah, it locked all of your rear guards at the beginning of your battle phase, and it could stand itself, I think, 2 times, which was kind of crazy. And just to add everything in, it did retire a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, it felt like at this point in time of the game, it just felt like they were like, we're just gonna word vomit on some cards because we already know that the game is moving on. Is what it kind of felt like. So it's just like, hey, let's just power creep in a sense. Because it did literally everything Kagero did. Added an extra imaginary gift, retired, restood. It's like, what else can this card do? Obviously, and you just played this card with the cross, and yeah, it just was crazy. So weird card. Good
Very
card.
weird.
A weird card.
Yeah, like power creep is a weird word to use because in this instance, I think in most instances V clan collections never ever power crept the clans that they were supporting. But this one was interesting because it kind of just gave the end another thing to copy the abilities of if it really wanted to. It kind of felt like it was doing what the original Rebirth wanted to do back in Boomer Vanguard. Like you were saying, like it was a thing you could do if you felt like you could pull it off. But this thing could just like yank it out of your deck and put it in there, and then you kind of had a little toolbox, I guess, which was cool, but like we said, it did too much, so the magic of it never quite caught on as far as like people kind of moving away from V and playing standard and premium actually now.
Yeah, so good card, weird card.
Good card, weird, true. But then now we go a full circle and we finally get to the guy. The Dragonic Overlord.
The Dragonic Overlord. So this is where they fixed Dragonic Overlord kind of as a whole, I think.
Okay.
To base Dragonic Overlord, not the end, the base. So he's got a continuous skill. That's very great. When it attacks a rear guard, cannot call cards to guard. All I'm saying, that made it so it didn't have the like it still has the must hit thing, but it gives it an effect to say, okay, you can't really guard this. Obviously, nowadays that's different because there are, so many blitz orders and things that give power that you can try to go get around that. But they can't call cards from the hand to guard, so stops a lot of that. But then the second skill sticks to traditional kind of Overlord, counterblast, discard a card, restand it, drive -1. But you still attack rear guard on your first, Vanguard on your second. You guys still get the same kind of effects. So a great progression, I think. It doesn't necessarily give power itself innately, but it still gets the effect off most of the time, especially when it came out. Like it stuck to its guns. It says, I'm going to hit here, then I'm going to swing a Vanguard. And you decide what to do about that.
Yeah, leave it to Overlord to always remind us that, having more than 3 attacks, it doesn't necessarily mean that you want all of those attacks to go to the Vanguard. It was kind of a interactive form of Overlord, I suppose, where it still wanted to do something to the opponent's rear guards, and it did it in a really creative way. Like it's super cute how it says that you just can't guard against it when he attacks a rear guard, and also if somehow he's ever a rear guard as well, he has that, which it's cute. I like when they think about stuff like that and they give it a rear guard effect too, on the off chance you have to call it as a rear guard as well. But I do think that it gives it a unique identity from all the Overlords before it as well, which we'll kind of see as we cover more boss units in this series. But it was definitely cool to see him come out in the incarnation he did, especially when they upgraded him to the end.
Yeah. Obviously, I wasn't into V when Overlord was out. Mostly himself, I actually got in. 2 sets after the end came out. So when I got back into the game, I had to buy the deck with all of those. And then the promos came out and it got real expensive.
Yeah.
But still good card for what it was in the early sets.
Yeah, the end though, he just kind of took it and he just made it that little bit better in a way that I can appreciate. Like, it's nothing out there enough that he just like head and shoulder became one of the best decks. But it was nice to see that, like, even in like early standard, the like the format we're in now, where we have all these crazy decks, just a deck that could stay at 2 drive checks and get 2 Vanguard swings of 4 total drive checks. That was enough to win. And like you said with those promos, where it kind of tried to mitigate the cost of what you're discarding, being the one that like counts as 2 cards, and then if he's discarded, you can like call him as a booster and stuff like that. Like that's a cute thing that keeps it where it should be for a deck that's trying to like encapsulate what it was back in 2011.
Yeah, and I kind of liked early on, right before the promos came out, because it felt like obviously the big new mechanic in D was the ride deck, as well as the Persona ride effect. So it kind of was like kind of nice because you ran the original Overlord in your ride deck, because you had to have it in your soul, and there wasn't any really soul charge in, well, Dragon Empire. So it was kind of an odd one. And then you would have to search your deck to try to find the end and then ride it manually. But you didn't get the Persona ride on that first turn because, different named card. It's not a Persona ride. So it kind of created that, like, okay, here's where I'm starting to pick up on you. But then the next turn on my Persona ride, it really felt like you had 3 grade 3 turns before you were really on your 3rd grade 3 turn, was like, hey, this is I'm trying to kill you turn. I'm going to hit you for a bunch of power. I'm going to have 4 drive checks. I'm going to have 4 attacks total. So it kind of was like a nice pace of the game. Obviously, we've sped up immensely since then.
What a simpler time, dude. What a simpler time.
I mean,
when I Persona ride on my turn 6, that's when you're dead.
That's
dude.
when I got you. But then they added a promo, Ardor Hatchet Dragon, that literally just said, hey, actually, you don't run Overlord in the ride deck anymore. You run it in your main deck. And then you got to find a way of discarding it. And then we'll just take it from your drop and shove it to your soul, and you get all the effects anyways. So you're like, okay, for my turn 6 is now my turn 5. Like, that's,
or even just your turn 3.
Yeah.
Maybe. Or turn 4.
If you win second, then you can shove it into your soul, and then you can do it. Yeah. But yeah, it's an interesting mechanic. But it was like very good that those promos got in, because it fixed a lot of problems. Like I said, they were really expensive when they were kind of coming out, and even still kind of they're that way. Last I looked at, Howl was still kind of up there, but I have my playset, so I don't really look at it. But they've been tried to be reprinted multiple times and help it out a little bit. But we'll see if we ever get an additional edition of Dragonic.
I think it'd be cool. I really do think that they could put like the cross or the grade or something in standard, and I think they could do something pretty creative with it. I actually really do want them to revisit what they did with the cross in V, where it can get the abilities of the overlords, like you shove into soul. Like, that sounds really, really cool. And I think that in a format where you're not like abusing gift markers, and you have like a bit more like tame, I guess, incarnations of Overlord, you can make the deck kind of toolboxy and make it do a lot of interesting things. I don't know.
Yeah, I would love to see if they added in the cross, where you have to have, so like Overlord is there, but then like Dragonic Overlord at the end has to have Dragonic Overlord in your soul. Whereas I think the cross should have Dragonic Overlord and Dragonic Overlord at the end.
Sure.
In your soul to like get some effects. Like, that'd be really cool to like activate a divine. It's probably not gonna be a divine skill, but Something along those lines where it can copy like both effects of them or something.
Ooh, okay.
Reduce the cost.
How about this? It's got an act where it can put any overlord you want from your deck into your soul. That's like once per turn, and like you like Soul Blast 1 or Soul Blast 2 or however you want to do it. And then it has an on attack skill where you can put a card from your hand into your soul and stand it or something. And then it has a third skill where if you like bind a Dragonic Overlord and a Dragonic Overlord that end from your soul, then it deals your opponent a damage or something crazy. I think that'd be kind of cute.
There's some wiggle room here.
There's some sauce, I think.
It would be exciting because deck building would be kind of interesting to have 3 different grade 3s in it. Well, you could kind of get away with running just one of them in your ride.
Yeah, like you could do kind of like a Youthberg thing, I guess, sort of.
Yeah, so it could be super fun and hopefully great. But we'll see. Yeah. I don't know if they'll ever do it because they're kind of into this whole new era, and they're doing great in the like upcoming reprints of like Maelstrom and some of these other decks that have kind of gotten those newer versions.
Vermilion.
And the blood is coming out. So like they're doing great, but they already have 2 iterations of Overlord, so they're kind of like, I don't know if it needs any. It doesn't necessarily need love. I would love for it to get an update and have some good cards. Like the biggest thing we need right now is there's a promo card in Japan called Blazing Warcry, and if we just get that card,
I've never heard
Overlord,
of that card in my life.
It is so good.
What is it?
It is an order. It's a grade 2 order card that has 3 different skills on it. And one of them allows you to search for like your Vanguard's card name and add it to hand. So you get a persona ride. One allows you to choose a card from your drop or something and add it into your soul. And then the third one like allows you to search your top 7 and call over your cards. So like it kind of does. It's like so toolboxy.
Is it an Overlord card or just a Dragon Empire card?
Dragon Empire card.
Never heard of it. Wow.
That again, it's all off the top of the head. So
sure.
But once you get that, because then like it changes the whole deck list. Like you run Shinri's for sure for Soul Charge and cool. Card draw. You can technically ditch Ardor Hatchet Dragon because he doesn't really do a whole lot, and because the grade 2 order does the same thing. So it creates some interesting aspects because like I think you can take the Overlord if you discard it at grade 1 on your grade 2, you can shove it to your soul early enough. So in your first grade 3 turn, it would speed it up to the point where you can get your 4 drives that first grade 3 turn. So like, I think that would help balance out the deck a little bit. Not necessarily make it still, Reziel or Varga levels of skill, but I think it could still put up some fights and have some fun.
I think that'd be cool. I do think
we'll see if we get that.
It never really incorporated an order into its game plan, which is something that they have a trend we'll see with the other encounter decks. But I think where this deck ended up midway through the current lifespan of Standard, it had its time in the sun for a decent bit after the end came out, and especially after like Ardor Hatchet and Help came out. This deck had a lot to say, and it said it, and now we have like a ton of decks that restand their Vanguard, and I like to think it spiritually lives on in Varga in a way, maybe.
Oh yeah, Varga is just the new iteration of it, and they do great because he's a big badass dragon, and that's the spirit of Overlord, is he's a big badass dragon. So I can't be mad about it. I'm glad that they're not necessarily moving on from the past, but they gave the limelight to the past in the earlier sets of things. Now that they're into Divines, they're like, okay, we've had our fun with our past. Now we kind of move on to our future and kind of start separating it out, and kind of getting into those other cards. And it's a good thing for the game. It's a little sad for the game also at times too, because you're like, there are so many decks that you're like, I want love to this. Like, I know I need a new Overlord card, or I need this. And there are so many decks out there that need new cards that can do things, but at the same time.
Yeah, you're right, dude. Where's my Flagbird? I need my new Flagbird form. I'm kidding.
Maelstrom's superior.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah. Well, either way, yes, it's kind of a fun aspect of the game that they added. They kind of are getting away from it a little bit in the sense, but I was glad it was there to get me back into the game. Now I'm here and I'm stuck again, and
never getting out.
I say it so lovingly, like I know I sound like, oh, I'm back in the game, but I love it. I'm glad I am, and Overlord is the guy to do it, so we had to talk about him.
Yep. And there's gonna be a lot more to say about other decks coming up when it comes to like how they're interpreted into standard. But for now, that'll be the video. If you listened all the way through, thanks. It's a big deal to us. We like to upload more often as the new year has started. So if you want to keep up with us, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to be notified if we ever do upload. Maybe not if, when we upload next. Yeah. You gotta keep it tight. You know how it is. But until that happens, I was Cole.
And I was Trey.
And we'll see you all in the next one.